They walked into the classroom and 2 chairs were empty. Then the bell rang. The lesson plan opened and life moved on. If you want to follow every new detail in the Lily and Jack case, hit subscribe and ring the bell now so you don't miss updates. Keeping eyes on this story matters. 2 small children disappeared from Lansdowne Station, Pictou County, on May 2nd. The town has not been the same since. What nobody expected was a quiet that followed inside the elementary school they attended. 2 little desks, 2 bright backpacks, 2 name tags, visible reminders of family's worst day, and a building trying to balance normal routines with the kind of sorrow no lesson plan prepares you for. School administrators reopened on schedule the Monday after the disappearance, and the building filled with the usual weekday sounds. Lockers slamming, shoes scuffing, teachers greeting students. To the adults in charge, resuming routine meant stability. To many parents and teachers, it felt jarringly like everything was being put back into boxes as if nothing had happened. For children who noticed, it sent a confusing signal. When people vanish from your life, do you expect the world to pause, or do you learn to keep going? That single choice, to continue classes as planned, has become a test case in how institutions respond to community trauma. Teachers, often the unsung emotional first responders in the town, found themselves pulled in 2 directions. On one hand, they were expected to deliver curricula, fractions, spelling rules, reading goals. On the other, every hallway conversation, every empty desk reminded them of 2 missing students. That dual reality made lesson planning feel strange. How do you teach multiplication when grief sits in the memory of the classroom? How do you keep group norms when kids ask where Lily and Jack, in tones that demand honest answers? Many teachers work through this tension quietly, trying to keep children safe, anchored, and reassured while contented with their own private worry. Worry for the missing siblings, for the family, and for the fragile emotional state of the school community. For the children at the school, the absence was immediate and concrete. Kids notice what adults sometimes miss. A jacket missing from a peg, a water bottle never refilled, the sound of one fewer voice during playtime. Several students described feeling unsettled by vague answers from adults. Teachers gave age-appropriate explanations, often telling students that the children were away or not at school right now. Those phrases were meant to protect younger minds from worry, but they left older kids unsatisfied and curious. Children naturally seek closure and explanation. When the answers are thin, it leaves them filling the blanks with fantasy, rumor, or anxious assumptions. That gap between what children wanted to know and what adults felt able to say became a site of tension and care. Administrators defended the decision to prioritize routine. Their argument was practical and familiar. A school is a place of structure. Children depend on predictable schedules for safety and a sense of normalcy. In the immediate aftermath of community trauma, returning to familiar rhythms can reduce panic and prevent the entire system from destabilizing. Counselors and social workers were often on site to offer support for anyone struggling, and some schools held quiet classroom discussions led by trained staff to help students process, in age-appropriate ways, what had happened. These soft interventions aimed to acknowledge the loss without turning the entire school day into a constant, draining grief session. The goal was to provide emotional support while maintaining a learning environment that parents depend on. But the choice to emphasize normalcy also prompted questions from parents. Was the school protecting children or protecting itself? Some felt administrators were more concerned with avoiding liability, maintaining test schedules, and preserving appearances than with fully grappling with the community's pain. Others argued that prolonged school closures could do more harm than good, destabilizing families who rely on schools for childcare and for stable routines. Both positions reflect valid concerns. In communities hit by sudden loss, institutions must juggle competing responsibilities. To support emotional healing, to ensure child safety, and to keep essential services operating. Historical parallels make this decision complex. In other tragedies, from tornadoes to shootings to sudden deaths, institutions often choose to reopen quickly, partly out of necessity and partly to assert resilience. Schools, in particular, frequently reopen to signal community continuity. But critics note that reopening without a visible, structured grieving process can look like erasure. Children learn social cues from adults. If teachers and administrators move on too fast, children may internalize the message that disappearance, loss, or fear should be quieted rather than discussed. For families who are grieving or frightened, this approach can feel cold. The structure that once comforted now seems like a barrier to acknowledgement. When silence reigns in classrooms, it becomes its own evidence of denial. Silence can be protective, shielding young minds from traumatic details. But prolonged silence also risks communicating that something unspeakable has happened and must remain unsaid. For some students, the lack of open discussion translated into fear. If adults will not talk, maybe the situation is worse than anyone will admit. That atmosphere can encourage peer speculation, which is often more frightening and less accurate than an honest, carefully mediated conversation. In these contexts, educators who are trained to facilitate grief conversations can make a meaningful difference. When that training is missing, teachers may default to silence out of uncertainty or fear of doing harm. Teachers themselves carried a heavy burden. Many of them reported feeling guilt about whether they had missed warning signs. Could bruises or behavioral changes have been caught? Had a child mentioned something in passing that they dismiss as typical? Those internal questions haunt professionals who assume protective roles. Teachers are not investigators, but they are daily observers of children's well-being. Guilt in such situations is understandable. It arises from a sense of shared responsibility to protect children and from the painful knowledge that earlier intervention sometimes makes a difference. Administrators try to support staff with counseling resources and debriefings, recognizing that the emotional labor holding a classroom during a community crisis is both intense and underappreciated. Parents, for their part, reacted with a mixture of anger, confusion, and protectiveness. Some parents wanted the school to convene an assembly, a vigil, or at least an age-appropriate conversation that acknowledged the missing children and explained to students how they could be helpful by being kind, alert, and reporting anything unusual to a trusted adult. Other parents worried that detailed school discussions could traumatize younger children unnecessarily. These conflicting parental instincts left staff in a difficult position. How to satisfy a community divided over whether to foreground grief or preserve instruction. The community faced a moral crossroads. Keeping the school's engine running without pause risks communicating that the missing children's absence is a minor interruption. Pausing too long risks appending other children's routines and creating secondary harms. Neither option is morally pristine. There is no single right answer. Instead, the best approach lies in combining routine with intentional, visible acts of acknowledgement. Many advocacy groups recommend a hybrid model. Resume school to provide stability, but carve out time for structured remembrance, counseling, and open conversation led by trained professionals. This approach honors both the need for normalcy and the moral imperative to acknowledge loss. Past tragedies teach us that reopening too quickly can feel like an institutional defense mechanism. Schools and other institutions sometimes mistake the resumption of normal operations for healing. But true healing often requires pause. A classroom conversation that says, "We know you're scared. Here's what we're doing. Here's how you can help," can transform offhand fear into purposeful action. It can teach children about community responsibility, about how to notice danger and report concerns, and about empathy. Procedural normalcy without emotional scaffolding risks teaching children that disappearance matters only as disruption to schedules, not as a human emergency. Silence in the classroom can also become evidence, not wrongdoing necessarily, but of denial. When adults avoid talking about painful events, children interpret that avoidance as a lack of trust in their ability to cope, or worse, as proof that adults are hiding something. That perception erodes a relationship between students and educators. For a school committed to child development and safety, rebuilding that trust is crucial. Practical steps include bringing in counselors, allowing space for students to ask questions openly, and equipping teachers with language that acknowledges feelings without graphic detail. For example, 2 kids from our town are missing. People are searching for them. If you feel worried, tell a trusted adult. There are also systemic gaps that this case exposes. Teachers often receive little training in crisis communication or grief facilitation. Schools are built for learning, not sudden communal trauma. When emergencies occur, the invisible assumptions about adult competence are tested. To address these gaps, districts can invest in regular training for staff on how to lead conversations about loss, how to recognize signs of trauma in children, and how to coordinate with mental health professionals and law enforcement in ways that prioritize child safety and dignity. The ultimate test for any institution is whether it centers humanity over procedure when it matters most. Strength is not always keeping the wheels turning. Sometimes it is pausing the schedule to make room for sorrow. A well-placed circle time, a brief vigil, or a classroom lesson about community care can send a powerful message. We value life more than we value timetables. Children learn what we model. If adults make space for grief and action together, children learn resilience and empathy rather than silence and avoidance. What should parents, teachers, and community leaders take away? First, routine alone cannot carry the moral weight of a missing children crisis. Second, silence is not neutral. It communicates meaning and can foster fear or suspicion. Third, institutions must plan ahead. Train staff for grief response, create protocols that balance routine and acknowledgement, and ensure mental health supports are readily available. Fourth, the community must insist on transparent, compassionate communication that reassures without sensationalizing. Finally, the most important action is practical. If you know something, say something. If you feel grief, seek help. If you're a teacher, ask for the training you need. As the search for Lily and Jack continues, a school can be a place of healing rather than a place that fillets grief into silence. Teach children that being part of a caring community means noticing, asking, and helping. Encourage adults to make visible, guided spaces for remembrance. And hold institutions accountable not only for schedules, but for the moral work they do in shaping how a community responds to the most painful of events. If you have information about Lily and Jack, please contact the official tip lines. If you are a parent or teacher feeling overwhelmed, reach out to your school counselor or local mental health services. If you want updates on this story and more, like this video, hit subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Don't let routine dull responsibility. Keep asking questions, keep sharing credible tips, and keep the conversation alive. The lessons children learn now about attention, care, and conscience will last a lifetime.